So thinking about translating other evaluation frameworks for education and using those with the MOOCs. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, the thing I want to point out about evaluation is that at the heart of evaluation is about your values and what you think is most important. And evaluation is collecting multiple sources of data, multiple sources of evidence, and arriving at a judgment. And evaluation fundamentals begin with assessing the stakeholder needs and values, and then the context of the evaluand. And so without a fundamental understanding of these factors, then any evaluation metrics or whatever, they have the risk of just not being useful. And it's particularly important because the MOOCs are so diverse in terms of the stakeholders. We have a lot of different institutions involved in them, especially when you think about academic, corporate, partnerships. We've got the MOOC platforms themselves, and then you have the learners. I mean, there's a lot of stakeholder needs going on here and people looking to the MOOCs for a variety of things. So we developed what's called the Contextualized Evaluation Framework. And what we were saying is that an understanding of the stakeholders would inform how the courses were being designed and the course characteristics, and then when the enrolled learners interact with that course characteristics, that plays out in their behavior and in their outcomes. And our whole goal here was to contextualize evaluation metrics for MOOCs so that we could make proper inferences or valid inferences about the learner behavior. So we ended up doing a lot of stakeholder studies. I'm not going to share them all with you, but we did a lot of interviewing faculty. We've done a lot of looking at learners and talking to a lot of folks, but essentially we're saying that the framework would require, at a minimum, require evidence of learner satisfaction and learning outcomes based on what the learner's goals are, and then also the pedagogical practices and the quality of the assessments, and then inevitably the broader impacts, return on investments. And that's sort of, again, that perspective of like, what is the corporate or, partner getting out of it, what they were hoping. So we're going to be talking mostly about the learner satisfaction and learner outcomes piece, but I want to just point something out on the pedagogical practices. The National Academies published the second How People Learn 2 out in 2018, and there is relevance here when they've reviewed the research from cognitive science, educational science, and the learning sciences about how people learn that I think is directly related to and can be applied in MOOC platforms. So I think that when we go to evaluate how the course designs are, that we can pull criteria out from this as a way of looking at the pedagogical practices. So in particular, I'm going to share with you two conclusions that the committee had. The first is that the decision to use a technology for learning should be based on evidence indicating that the technology has a positive impact in learning situations in respect to the types of learning and goals for the learning, the characteristics of the learner, the learning environment, features of the social and cultural context that are likely to affect learning, and the level of support in using the technology to be provided to the learners and educators. And the other conclusion I think is most relevant to us is that effective use of technologies in formal education and in training requires careful planning for the implementation that addresses factors known to affect learning. So factors such as alignment of technology with learning goals, providing professional development and support for the instructors, equitable access to technology, ongoing assessment of student learning, and evaluation of implementation. So I can take these these lists here and pretty quickly come up with a list of criteria of how we could evaluate the courses in terms of their pedagogical practices. So like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about making sense of the learner satisfaction and learner outcomes, because I think this is the part that is the most challenging to evaluate. So the first study I'm going to share with you some just quick and dirty results. If you're interested in the methods, I'll show you to the papers a little bit more. But we've got feedback from learners in more than 800 MOOCs offerings that were from the Future Learn platform. So a thank you to Future Learn for providing this data for us to mine. So the question was asked, how could the course be improved, and what was your favorite part of the course and why, the least favorite part and why? And so you can see these are just the learners who stayed to the end. So this is one particular group, right? They're the group that utilized it more like a course because they're there at the end. And then we broke it down into the categories of arts, business and law, health, and STEM. You can see we had 193 courses in arts, so that led us to 51,000 respondents, and so forth. So a whole lot of people. So we used the latent derelict allocation topic model to identify the topics and themes from the responses. So the way this works is that it'll suggest topics, but then in order to make the interpretation of what that topic was, then we went through and we actually did qualitatively, like we sampled out 100 cases and qualitatively analyzed so that we would make sure that we were interpreting those results, authentic to what the learner was actually saying. So the way this looks is like the question, what was your favorite part of the course and why? And so then our topic model told us these were the words that were used most often. And so then, like I said, we pulled out 100 cases. So here's a quote. My favorite part of the course is the interactive and discussion section. It was great to share ideas and exchange knowledge with people of various tribes and culture who share a common passion. So over time in the qualitative analysis, then that theme of enjoy peer and mentor interaction and review came. So here is our results for the favorite part of the course, and the way we have this visualized is that each bubble is for that topic area, and then when they cross over, it's because that topic, that theme emerged for all of those different areas. So it's interesting because the STEM learners were the only ones, well, they said the teaching methods more frequently, but then it did cross over into the other like business and law. The thing that was said the most, the favorite part of the course here, content, you see that in the middle where all of the bubbles crossed over there. So the content, peer interaction, actually some of the learners just said favorite part, I enjoyed all of it. Having specific topics, those were. So in terms of the areas for improvement, this was an interesting finding for us because, again, a lot of the learners were mentioning that content, so it's like content was mentioned as their favorite part, and it was also mentioned as an area of improvement. And then a lot of folks sometimes will think, at least, I'm around engineering MOOCs all the time, and so a lot of times the faculty will think, well, engineering or math and science, these things, they don't really need discussion or they don't need to have much interaction. And it was interesting because in the STEM courses here, that was a theme that popped up, was that they wanted more peer and mentor interaction around the assessments. They wanted more interaction in discussion groups. And so that is sort of, I think, is interesting to provide back that they were saying these were, areas for improvement. And keep in mind also this was from, again, the data from the Future Learn platform, which does have quite a bit of discussion, social built into the platform. Okay, so if you had this, what would you recommend? Like seeing these findings, what's your recommendation based on these results? So these are the areas for improvement based off of learners. And again, these are the learners who stayed to the end. You want to talk to each other for a minute? Think about it. Can you see it? You want me to go back to the other slide? I'll show it to you bigger. Okay, what's standing out to you about areas for improvement? And this is, again, a bird's eye look. This is very high level. What's standing out to you?
Yeah, blended learning.
What?
Blended learning. You want to go into the classroom to have interaction and peer and mentoring.
Blended learning could really address a lot of this, right? Like using the, okay, that's one. Yeah, blended learning could help with this. What else? Yeah.
Because you see help and you see time on them, is the major complaint by our course attendance physicians and nurses that they didn't have enough time because they were very busy. So it's the same experience here, and we don't have a solution.
Yeah. And I can tell you in both, and the data we've analyzed, both from edX and from Future Learn, like I said, when I first got involved, I really did read all those end of course surveys because I thought if they're taking the time to do it, I want to read it, and so few of them do. But it was very common that they said, that the expectation that was set on the course website was not their experience in the course. And I think that comes up with a lot with the content. It also comes up in, time and length. Difficulty and accuracy of course description. We see that a lot in the end of course surveys, where they didn't feel that what was on that, what was posted, that it was going to be is exactly what it was. So there seems to be sometimes a misalignment in their expectations and what their experiences were. Okay, so we can talk about this more. I gotta get going. So, okay, so the next one this is what we're working on ongoing, is really how do we contextualize outcomes and then have information that we can use for benchmarking. So this question of like being able to compare across MOOCs so that we can sort of start seeing, what to expect. I mean, it's really hard to be the person who's talking to the faculty member and they see their outcomes and remember this one, his face just looked so sad when we were sharing some of the results. And I was like, no, but let me show you results from all the other ones because actually you're doing really good. All right. So by now, we've been looking at 14 courses that are offered through edX, and so the enrollment's over 101,000 students. It's probably gone up quite a since the last time I made this. And then there's also been course videos on the YouTube that they can continue to access. So most of us know that there are different types of learners and that not all learners come in with the same, and that there have been several papers now doing clustering on the types of learners based off of their access. So we've done that as well. And so what we did is we made a clustering algorithm that we can just plug in when we get our data from edX to automate the clustering process. And so here we're looking across 9 courses, and what we see is that about total for those 9 courses, about 10% of them are what we call fully engaged, or they at least touched almost everything in the course. The 2 consistently engaged is more they've touched most things in the course. And then there's the cluster 3, about 11%. They stay engaged for about 1 unit. They interact with that. And then cluster 4, they interact with about a half of a unit or 1 week. That's about 25%. And then the sporadic group of these 9 courses is about 46%. And then the standard deviations are there. So when we take these clusters and we start thinking about looking at them in terms of outcomes, so we can compare here, and you can see that the 4th course only had 4% fully engaged in all the materials across, whereas the 2nd course had 14% fully engaged across. So it'd be really interesting to go and look at, are there course characteristics that encouraged participation longer in course 2 as opposed to course 4? Like, what were the course characteristic differences? So another thing we've done with the clustering is looking, and this is kind of hard to read, but looking at how different groups of users interact with different course materials. So the cluster of 4 spend more time looking at the website, the start page, and looking at what content is being offered. That's the thing that they're hitting the most, or the topics, whereas the cluster 1 group was spending more time with the videos. So we can look at this also at outcomes by cluster. So again, you can say, well, maybe pass-fail doesn't really matter, but if you're talking about earning a certificate, the pass-fail does matter, or anything more formal. So you can see here a comparison of, well, in the first course, there was of all those who were engaged, 47% passed, and then in the 2nd course, 73% of the fully engaged passed. So when we start filtering by the type of learner, we're able to start digging into more about what specific learners are learning and contextualizing them more. So one more thing I'm going to show, because I think I'm running out of my time, is we've done this clustering even over time. So it's very interesting because you can start seeing that when the course is in archive mode, who continues to interact with the material. So see if these start popping up. So even the folks who were dropping out in the course early on are still engaging with the content long after the course is dropped, or long after the course has been in archive mode, which I think is very interesting because it's showing that access to the materials over time, it is like a resource, you know, something that they can pull off the shelf. So for that learner, I mean, that, to me, that's a very encouraging finding that folks do continue to come back. All right, well, you're not gonna be able to process that with me. One more. So we took it, we started looking at the units. So here, those in cluster 1, their characteristics, they tend to treat the course a little bit more traditionally. They're often are the only group with passing users. They access about 96% of the videos, 98% of the web pages, and 100% of the assessment questions. It's interesting because in the MOOCs, the learners really do care about the assessment. I see that over and over. Cluster 2 characteristics, they access most of the material, about half of the videos, 3/4 of the web pages, 2/3 of the questions. Cluster 3, they consistently access that first unit. Then about 1/3 of them are dropping out or disengaging after, you know, the first few weeks. They access about 1/5 of the videos, 2/5 of the web pages, 1/3 of the assessment questions. So the conclusions here are, one is that we need more visualization tools to help contextualize learners based off the type of learning goals that they have so that we can start benchmarking, looking across courses, and focusing on the learners who are using it as a traditional course versus those who are using it maybe only as a resource, and start separating out based on the stakeholder and who's supporting it, which types of information are most important to them and how to evaluate them. I think this kind of analytics also help us to dive into courses where maybe there is some pedagogical issues or things that we could do for continuous improvement purposes. So hopefully we can use this research to continue to make informed decisions about how to structure the courses. So again, evaluation should be formed by stakeholder needs, the course characteristics, outcomes with the learner behavior, and learner outcomes according to what the learners are hoping for. Okay, can I ask them one question? I know you guys are supposed to give me questions, right? This is my end of my talk. But I want to know, what are you going to remember from the talk? So maybe, and then when you're saying that, you can start, this is the last thing I'll say. So thank you.